Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, we want to welcome you to today's webinar, Information Security and Compliance in the Cloud, Best Practices. I'm Tom Murphy. I'm General Manager and Editorial Director for the Simpler Media Group and CMS Wire. I'd like to give you a broad overview of our agenda today. We'll have a few minutes for introductions, and then we'll be bringing on Rich Medina of Doculabs and Chris Davidson of M-Files. Finally, we'll save about 15 minutes at the end of the program for you to hear your questions and provide live answers. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. You'll see that there's a chat window on the right side of your screen. If there's not, look for a red button at the top or bottom of your screen that says chat and click on it, and it should open up. When you want to use the chat, feel free to type in your message and then choose the direction for the presentation from the little pull-down menu there. You want to address your question to the host. Same thing for the Q&A. You can ask questions anytime during this program. We'll set them aside and get to them during our Q&A program. And we'll have an interactive poll during this presentation. That question will pop up on the big screen, but then a window will open on this right side of your screen where you'll actually vote. Don't forget to hit the submit button when you do. And please vote. Your answers really matter to us and help guide the program. CMS Wire has been around since 2003. We have more than 400 editorial contributors, and many of them are practitioners like you. We publish over 200 articles a month, have editorial themes each month. We have tweet jams, hangout webinars like this one. We cover customer experience, digital marketing, social business, enterprise collaboration, enterprise information management, and other issues. Today's presentation is sponsored by the good folks at M-Files, enterprise information management solutions that eliminate information silos and provide quick and easy access to the right content from any core business system and device. Without further ado, I want to introduce today's speakers. Our first will be Rich Medina. Rich is the co-founder and principal consultant at Doculabs, which has established itself as the premier consultancy in the enterprise content management, or ECM, market. It's been engaged by most of the Fortune 500 over its 20-year lifespan. Our second speaker will be Chris Davidson, product marketing manager of M-Files, who oversees initiatives including video creation, messaging strategy, and collateral development. And now it's my pleasure to turn controls over to Rich Medina, who will be our first speaker. Rich, if you will take the microphone, you may start your presentation.
Thank you. Just a couple words about Doculabs. We're a strategic consulting firm that focuses on information management and information governance. And we're completely independent. That is, we don't partner with software services companies. We don't develop or sell software. So we have no dog in the hunt. So what I'm going to try to present in the next 40 minutes or so is, to the best of my ability, it's objective information to help you move along with cloud and security and compliance. Shoot me an email afterwards if you want more information, white papers, or other information about some of the technical issues I'm talking about. So the issue today is about cloud compliance and security. The cloud presents us with what in mathematics and engineering we call an optimization problem. And it's very useful to use this tool, this concept, when you're dealing with information management. You got an optimization problem whenever you have some objectives or factors that you want to improve, but you can't maximize them all because they conflict with each other in some way. And cloud-based EIM, enterprise information management, and the other new information management trends like mobility and social content are riddled with these optimization problems, but they all boil up mostly to one single one, and that is, how do we get the benefits of the cloud while controlling the risks and costs, particularly the security and control issues it has, and the risk and costs that come from the fact that it's a relatively new technology with fewer best practices, let's say, than imaging, which has been around for 30 years or so. But there are two pieces of good news here. The first is that we can really isolate the new stuff and the uncertain stuff from tried and true methods and things we know and so on. So the first bit of good news is that there's a methodology for how to plan and roll out these new technologies that present optimization problems and what we might call the roadmap problem. Roadmap problem is how do we roll out these technologies without hurting ourselves, and how do we know that we're taking the right steps in the right order? So the methodology has been used for years in enterprise content management and so on with the content-related technologies. The second bit of good news is that though cloud-based EIM seems to be new, we've collectively been doing off-prem or outsourced EIM in some form or other since at least the 1990s. Even large-scale production-hosted imaging and workflow and archiving and remote access applications like for electronic billing and such. So there are best and worst practices there that we can apply. Cloud-based. So we can be successful in deploying cloud-based EIM if we incorporate the above best practices as we address the following issues. Now I direct your attention to the slide. We should be clear first about the domain of EIM. That is, we should have a map of the territory so we can evaluate and plan our opportunities. And we should be clear on what obligations and requirements we have for security and costs and increasing revenue and retaining customers, and our defensive business objectives like ensuring security and compliance with regulations. So that's what I'm going to do here in this presentation. In the first section, what are your obligations? I'm going to give you a map of the EIM territory so you can plan for the next 3 to 5 years or so. And then I'm going to clarify IG, or information governance, whose role it is to ensure your information security and compliance. I'll explain what type of program framework you should use to plan and manage your EIM initiatives to meet your security and compliance objectives. And then in the second section, what issues does the cloud seem to present? I'm going to address head-on the security and compliance issues that the cloud is perceived to have. These apparent issues have all become strengths for cloud deployments. And then in the final section, what should you do? I'm going to address that roadmap problem I talked about. I recommend what you should do first, second, third, and so on. So let's start with a map of the territory of the content technologies, a map that shows you the current state of the world and which you can use for planning for the next 3 years. This probably ain't it. It's a bit simple, but it's a useful, simple proxy. ECM, or Enterprise Content Management, which you see in the upper left, is part of the broader domain of EIM. The figure shows the EIM domain, which includes ECM, Enterprise Data Management, and Information Governance, which spans and addresses both ECM and Enterprise Data Management. For simplification, we're putting social content in the ECM box. That's good enough for our purposes. It's like putting Hawaii and Alaska boxes next to the continental U.S. And most of you and social content, enterprise data management, maybe not at all yet, though your IT peers in your organization probably have. As Forrester says, the connection between ECM and EDM is barbell in shape, or a sideways hourglass, with the commonalities, the middle piece growing, the connections growing. The idea, though, is that you should have this kind of map that's directional, aspirational, so you don't hinder your moves in the next few years. You should start in one area of the map, probably most of you doing ECM and records management, and then you expand using this as a guide. Now, IG, or information governance, down below, spans and addresses both ECM and EDM. I'll clarify IG in a moment, but your organization has obligations for records management, for discovery, and for security and compliance requirements across the board to address risk. So your EIM program should make an effort to clarify and align these objectives, which sometimes conflict with each other, with your ECM and EDM initiatives. So IG, information governance, is a set of practices that does just this. It's one of the exciting, growing, clarifying new disciplines. So what is the scope of information governance? Let's get a clear definition, since the ones that you see, I believe, are either typically unreadable legalese or a bit confused. The best general definition I've seen for information governance is the one up here from Bob Smallwood. It's the control of information to meet your legal, regulatory, and business requirements. That's a great start because it's accurate, and as I say, it's simple. It's not a laundry list of items, or it's not written in legalese and so on. But I'd say I tweak it because it's too broad, and we need to guard it from overreach and failure. I'd say that IG is the control of information to meet your legal, regulatory, and business risk requirements. This is very important. Information governance doesn't address all your business demands. Its primary focus is on defensive business requirements as opposed to the offensive business requirements. Its primary focus should be on controlling the risks and risk-based costs of your information. It doesn't primarily address the offensive requirements of operational efficiency or meeting customer demands. If it does that, in addition to doing risk, that's great. But if it does those things, if it helps you improve your brand image, but fails at security and compliance, you've got a failed information governance program. So what are the big IG challenges that are relevant to the cloud? Well, cloud-based EIM is one of the sources of and possible solutions for most of your emerging 2015 IG problems. The big challenges are three. They're right here. First is the digital landfill or swamp problem. So you folks may have 50 or 100 or 1,000 terabytes or 10,000 terabytes, 10 petabytes of information in your shared drives and email and so on. So how do you sort through it and responsibly retain or dispose appropriately within your budget constraints? This problem, the digital landfill problem, is exacerbated by the cloud if you're not addressing it head on. So we're seeing many organizations implement both authorized and unauthorized cloud silos. The cliche is that anyone is a CIO if they have a credit card. And this causes over-retention, but also the second problem, the fragmentation problem. And the fragmentation problem concerns how you do information governance on your dynamic, sometimes chaotic systems of engagement that use cloud and mobile devices and social media. And you may be feeling your way with some deliberate initiatives to move your business forward with these new technologies, but they're also growing organically within and outside of your organization, driven by the CIOs with the credit cards. While the digital landfill problem would be an issue without the new technologies like the cloud, just by the old-fashioned ECM technologies using client server and the web, the fragmentation problem is directly caused by cloud and mobile and social. And then there's the third big problem, which is how do you prepare for and respond to regulatory, audit, litigation, other discovery, given number one, number two above, given the growing piles of content in the cloud created or spread by mobile devices inside and outside of your firewall. So those are the challenges. Big enterprise-level information governance problem that concern compliance and security and which are caused by or worsened by the cloud if it's not managed effectively. So manage your cloud use responsibly according to an EIM and information governance program. But there are also areas where cloud-based EIM and a good program not only helps, but is actually necessary for compliance and security. So, for example, for HIPAA and SEC and other requirements, you must have relevant policies and procedures, and they must be documented and managed and accessible and retained for a particular period of time. The acronym for policies and procedures, the documentation, but also for these high-risk files, these high-risk documents. Many organizations are doing the direct remediation and proactive activities necessary for regulatory HIPAA and SEC compliance. That is, you write the required policies and procedures, you set up communications and training, and you just get rolling with it. But this isn't sustainable. It's the wrong approach. It's partial. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You need a system to put the policies and procedures and critical files in. You need a sustainable way to make sure the information gets into the proper bucket, gets tagged appropriately. And this means not only that you need the right technology, but you also need new roles and new metadata tags and new processes and change management. And so this is often the second missing piece that we see in our clients, these necessary or enabling conditions to make this thing happen and be sustainable beyond, say, the first 6 months. And then the third piece is that you also want to make sure that your compliance and other defensive efforts don't hinder your ability to do business and accomplish your offensive objectives of increased sales or better branding. You want a business worth defending. So you actually want your compliance efforts not only to not hinder your offensive efforts, you want them to take advantage of the same systems and processes and actually help your offensive efforts. Okay, in English, I'll explain, you want to be able to have not just regulatory compliance drill your business into the ground, but you want to be using the same good policies and procedures and systems and document systems in the cloud and so on, if that's what you're using, to be able to not fulfill findability, for example, not only for regulatory audit, but also for sales and marketing and such. So sustainability and meeting your security and compliance obligations isn't possible without aligning those efforts with information management and governance, and probably the technologies that manage the documents for both offense and defense. So I've said a mouthful, and there are many moving parts and dependencies that I talked about: technology, information architecture, roles and responsibilities, policies and procedures, change management. So there are a lot of moving parts with dependencies that you have to stay on top of, a lot more than just implementing cloud-based EIM. So I recommend that you start with an information management and information governance program framework, which is just a glorified checklist. But it's been proven to be a useful kind of checklist for those organizations who are addressing complex initiatives or in EIM or ECM or records management, e-discovery, and so on. The program framework organizes the individually necessary and jointly sufficient action for planning and management initiatives in the content technologies. It's very useful if you've got a portfolio that includes one or more cloud-based technologies and then your many in-house technologies that you're using for ECM and related technologies. So assembling these conditions and activities to effectively handle EIM and information governance involves much more than just the technology or process. It requires competency in a number of areas. We found that it's most useful to bucket the areas of competency into these 6 categories that you see here or in this picture here. So overall, having an overall program strategy to manage your current state, your future state, and the roadmap to get you there. Your org structure and governance operations structure, the people who will be carrying out the various activities, designing your processes and the policies and procedures for the life cycle, including e-discovery, having a good information architecture for findability of the documents, but also for records retention and defensible disposition, having a good architecture for the content technologies that includes both in-house and outsourced off-prem technologies, and then finally the change management and communications and training on the other 5 pieces. Lots of moving parts here. You hook them together with managing their dependencies and so on, and because you're managing the dependencies between the pieces, you can modify your roadmap accordingly when you lose budget or something else comes up. You can also isolate those areas that have high degrees of risk or uncertainty. Now, cloud-based EIM is not one of those areas. But there are other areas of your roadmap which may be, like doing external social media for sales and marketing and customer support and so on. But you can manage those areas very effectively because you've got this rock-solid methodology to help you move forward. So now I'm going to address some of the issues specific to the cloud that seem to present challenges to security, compliance, and information governance. And these are specifically risk, data security, and cost. All of these started out as challenges for cloud, but are now advantages. And this is the case with other perceived cloud challenges as well, such as user functionality. It doesn't do as much. Accessing your content, service reliability and availability, and so on. Those which used to be disadvantages or perceived disadvantages are now advantages of the cloud. They've all become strengths. So let's address risk and data security and costs, which are particular to information governance, security, and compliance. So some believe that the cloud is too risky for your content, but as you can see here, you can use it to mitigate compliance, legal, and business risks. You can leverage third-party automated, repeatable processes and protocols. If you go with a good vendor, good service provider, not their first rodeo, so you've been doing this. It can preserve your data on worm storage for SEC or other requirements. They can secure, monitor, backup, replicate, and store data on a petabyte scale, like many of our financial services clients, and so on. Second, for data security, some believe that cloud provides inadequate security and data protection. But you go with the right vendors that typically dedicate more resources for security than in-house operations do. They're typically the data centers are audited, and the good ones can provide reporting on policies, communications, procedures, and monitoring, the kind of documentation which I was talking about. And then some believe that both cost for the services and particularly the cost for ensuring security and compliance are more expensive than on-prem. But if you do a business case, you can show that it's actually lower TCO and CapEx, and primarily because you're reducing your investments in hardware and storage and infrastructure and storage and software, You're paying predictable monthly costs, and you're saving on indirect costs, including power, cooling, and so on. You also don't have to build for spikes in service to ensure getting in within your SLAs with your customers and so on and complying with what you have to do there. And you can only pay for the services used. So those are areas which typically were perceived as disadvantages but are now advantages of the cloud and doing EIM through the cloud. All right, so we talked about the EIM map and your obligations for compliance and how the cloud is a potential issue in contributing to the swamp and fragmentation and discovery, but if done well, can be part of the solution in reducing those. We talked about some of the perceived issues that the cloud seems to present in terms of risk and data security and cost, and how those are advantages today. And now we're going to talk about what you should do. That is a kind of roadmap. Very simple. I'm only giving 3 steps. But the first thing to do that we're focused on is on reducing security risk and ensuring compliance. We're talking about information governance, is to do a focused and quick current state assessment of where you are. A CSA, a current state assessment of your organization situation, address the normal enterprise content management categories that you know about. So people and process and technology and content. And as I indicated, there's a solid methodology for doing this, but also address and document the important newer systems of engagement issues. So look for your social media policy and so on. Assess and document the important SOE categories and issues such as the division of labor between IST and users, which is different than traditional ECM, the capabilities that you folks are using, the configurations, the various types of devices which might be hooked up to the cloud, and the type of users and user scenarios. And you will see lots of fragmentation, lots of uncontrolled diversity, failed enterprise syncing, and so on. Second, in this, as part of this, do implement general baseline principles across the various information silos, content formats, devices, and business units and organizations. I won't go into detail here, but it's what guidelines and standards as to what tools should be used when, what repositories should be used when, guidelines based on principles about the information lifecycle. You use this cloud-based app for this kind of content, maybe just transient and work in process, and use this cloud-based app for, it can include records-worthy documents, and so on. Next, identify your cloud-based EIM opportunities. So this is the functional requirements section. Many of the EIM vendors that are out there differ radically in the kinds of capabilities that they have. All of them have an appropriate fit, but you've got to fit the right need to the right tool. So I'm just going to throw out some names, the names that you all know. So Microsoft SharePoint is very different than Documentum, which is different than anything IBM does, which is different than OpenText, Highland, and so on, which is different than Box and Dropbox, and so on. Each of them have a particular portrait of what types of needs they can address. And these 6 areas are a great way of cutting up and segmenting and organizing your kinds of opportunities so you can fit it. So first, look at the range from low value and risk to high value and risk. Some of your documents are going to be very high value, high risk. Those are the regulated documents. Those are the high security documents and so on. So that's one aspect. Some of them are going to be low value and risk. Those are much of the stuff that's on your shared drives, perhaps. Then there's this middle area, which is moderate or indeterminate value and risk. That might include a lot of your work in process, drafts, and so on. But slice up your document needs in that way. Second way, think about internal versus external. This has to do with, let's say, breadth of participation. Some documents you are going to be just using internal in your organization inside the firewall. Some you're going to be sharing with external folks, or external folks are going to be using them. Completely different scenarios. Third is sharing versus not sharing. So there may be external folks who are using docs, but they're not doing a lot of collaboration, dynamic document management, and so on. In other cases, there are going to be external folks who are going to be working with you folks inside the firewall, and there's going to be a lot of collaboration back and forth, author review and approval, and so on. Completely different set of requirements. Low to high with respect to process management and system integration. In English, what that means is to what degree some of your needs you have to hook up to, say, ERP systems or quality management systems or product lifecycle management systems or customer relationship management systems and so on. And so there's a lot of this integration stuff. Some has to be plugged into workflow and process management and so on. Others are pretty much just, you're just dealing with digitization of what used to be formerly paper documents. So look at your needs in that way. Two more. Low to high with respect to content management. This is similar to sharing, but it's how granular you need to be in advanced library functions, let's say. So how many, do you have to do versions, major versions, minor versions? Is there a sophisticated author and review and approval process that has to go through and so on? So in many of your, for developing SOPs or some of your quality documents and many of these, for compliance documentation, you typically need this to be high, as opposed to another application where you're just serving up, say, those documents in a portal to regulators or to internal people, where that kind of content management is low. And then in the meaning that I mean here. And then finally, the kinds of content and infrastructure. So is the content just Word documents or HTML, or is it, say, CAD drawings or rich media and so on? So some systems that are out there, cloud-based or otherwise, don't do a good job of multi-platform, multi-format, rich content, big files, the complex, low value to high value, if you do them, and so on. Absolutely essential, I would say, if you're mapping out your strategy. And then finally, I'd say take one step at a time. You know, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Work in a methodical way. Identify your current state of your opportunities and select one of them to go after first. And then what you do, what we find to be best is first, determine what that application will look like under ideal conditions. So if money were no objects, how do you max out that kind of application? And what you'll find is that some, you go to 11, some require lots of sharing, cloud-based, lots of external participation, lots of weird file types and so on, but others actually at their maximum optimal state are much less ambitious. Accounts payable is one. Accounts payable, and Plato's version of accounts payable, you don't need a lot of collaboration. You don't need a lot of creativity. What you try to do is have a repeatable process where every approval of these invoices looks very much like the one that was before it. You don't want a lot of creativity and uncertainty in it. So that puts an upper bound on what it's going to be. Then step 3 here is you inject constraints imposed by reality. That is, you folks have a certain budget, a certain amount of limited resources in terms of time and people and expertise you have, and then, of course, a certain tolerance for risk of project failure, risk of something untoward happening in the deployment or after the deployment and so on. So you'll be constraining it. And then what I would say is this: take only one step at a time, closing the gap between current state and future state. So what I mean by that is don't go from a completely paper-based accounts payable system all the way to a cloud-based, maximally digital, interactive accounts payable system where you're relying on all employees to fill out their own expense reports and so on, and you've got a workflow and such. Do it in 3 steps or so. If you want to compress more than one step, then have a really good reason for doing so. The idea here is to minimize the maximum bad things that can happen when they do go wrong, and things always go wrong. So you try to protect yourself so you can stop yourself at any point in the roadmap and declare victory and wait until it's time, you've got budget or whatever, to take the next step. So just about done. The 4 takeaways I have are, first, don't add more silos with an EIM strategy. And we're seeing this a lot in, say, financial services and other organizations where they're adding specific subject matter focused silos, which means more places for documents, more fragmentation, and so on. We also see it within shared services, administrative applications, particularly for HR and for accounts payable, where they're adding these applications. These are fantastic, but make sure it's part of an overall strategy so you're controlling the swamp and fragmentation and other compliance and security issues. Secondly, align enterprise security and compliance planning with worsening those. So security and compliance planning is necessary for anything you do in EIM. But secondly, to do enterprise and secure and compliance appropriately, you need EIM. That is, you can't just, you're going to be documenting your policies and procedures. You're also going to be protecting, providing access to your sensitive information. You can't do that without an EIM, a set of EIM initiatives, and because it's going to be complex, they have to be part of a program framework. Third, address the fragmentation problem, which I already beaten to the ground. And then fourth, address the right applications with the right capability. There is a big trade-off that you may be doing. I said before that many solutions that you do with the 5% of the capabilities that you originally had planned on. That may be an option for you, but make sure that you're very clear on what your functional requirements are before you take that step. And here we have it's poll time, so I'm going to turn it over. Go ahead.
Hey, Rich, how are you? I want to tell you that was just an excellent and comprehensive presentation. I really enjoyed every slide you had there and your comments. Folks, it is time for you to get into the show. We want you to vote, so please take a moment and put down what you're doing and consider this question. Does your organization use the cloud to manage docs? Is it not allowed? Is it allowed but not used for high-value, high-risk business documents? Or is it allowed and used? And as they're tallying those votes, let me just ask Rich, where do you think people are going to come in on this? What's your experience?
Right. Well, typically what we see is that, the horse is out of the barn. So that not allowed. We do see that in certain organizations and button-down organizations, but for many organizations, it's just not possible. Folks are using the cloud, so I won't see that big. Likewise with D, I think that's not, in 2015, that's not going to be big.
Okay.
Results may prove me wrong, but typically it's B or C that we see. And what I've been trying to do is to have folks who are comfortable with B help them get more comfort with C. That is to have a strategy for putting their higher value, higher risk document up into the cloud with appropriate vendors and appropriate program framework. So I'd say I would
imagine that that's the progression. You go from B to C. And I think you indicated in your presentation a lot of those risks that we considered a couple of years ago or people are now perceiving as advantages. And that's an important point. But let's see how people answered here. I do have the results in, and B is the winning choice. Allowed but not used for high-value, high-risk business documents. 23% of our voters said that. The second choice was tied between it's not allowed or C, it's allowed for and used for high-value, high-risk documents. That's 13% each, so they were kind of straddling B. There's some below, some above, but twice as the total of those two are B. And then finally, 10% weren't sure about their response, and a good number of people sat by the sidelines, so I tend to lump them in towards the unsure part. But folks, we do appreciate your votes, and now we're going to go on with the presentation, and Chris Davidson is going to take over. So, Chris, please take it away, sir.
Great, thanks. Big thanks to Rich for his presentation. Rich really has a wealth of information in this space and related to compliance challenges and strategies, and I'm happy he was able to share his thoughts and expertise with us. And likewise, thank you, Tom and CMS Wire, for hosting the topic. My name is Chris Davidson. I am the Product Marketing Manager at M-Files, and I'd like to take a few minutes before our Q&A session to talk a little bit about the challenges presented by enterprise content management in general and highlight some solutions that relate specifically to information security and compliance, both in the cloud and on premises. The amount of content and information that businesses have to manage there are a number of options when you're dealing with this problem, but they generally fall into one of two camps. On one side, there are solutions like storing content in standard Windows folders or systems like Box and Dropbox that are really, really light on actual enterprise level content management features. And as a result, they're very familiar or easy to use. On the other end of the spectrum, there are these big ECM systems that have tons of features and modules, but they're also extremely complicated and expensive. And so, the gap that's left between those two types of systems is really the sweet spot that most businesses are looking for. Something that's simple and allows easy access to information without having to trade off true ECM functionality. To give you just a little bit of background about M-Files, it basically boils down to that M-Files is all about helping companies manage their information. We've got headquarters in Dallas, Texas, and in Finland, and we do have a truly global customer base. And as a result of that, we've been able to go into a lot of different markets and industries so that we have a really deep understanding of the specific challenges faced by all kinds of businesses. And while we have been able to focus to define standards and regulations, and so, the question becomes, how can something be inherently easy to use without having to give up important functionality that's related to compliance and regulation? And we think it starts with reframing how information is organized. Instead of storing content in folders where you've got to decide where it should go, what it should be named, etc., it's much easier to just define something by what it is, like a proposal, for instance, and what it's related to. So a certain customer or a project. This kind of approach is much more intuitive and it's much more precise, because while you may not remember where something is later in a folder structure, you can always remember what type of document it is or what customer or project it relates to. Another way to illustrate this is by relating it to the way an iPhone manages music. When you want to listen to music that's stored on your phone, you aren't accessing folders to pull up songs. You just open up the music app and it's there. It's organized automatically by playlist or artist or genre. The app intelligently presents your music to you in a natural, more efficient way. And this type of method is what gives you the flexibility to view content exactly the way you want to. That's something that's really important to us. Another important challenge is making sure you're able to connect all of your existing enterprise systems, like CRM or your ERP system, with all of your other stuff, like documents and projects, cases, other information, no matter if some or all of it is cloud-based. A lot of times, each of these systems houses data independently without communicating with the other systems. When your information is fragmented like that, you're having to switch between systems constantly to manually access and combine all of the data and information, and it's just not efficient at all. So by connecting all of your data, managing every aspect of your business becomes easier because you're able to see how the project you're working on relates to specific documents. You can see the contact information of the client while also accessing their invoice history. So connecting all of your systems with your content should be seamless. mFiles has been able to have an immediate impact on a lot of businesses by addressing exactly these challenges. And I would like to briefly focus on one of these examples. Third Coast Terminals is a petrochemical company, and they're located in the Gulf Coast region of Texas. And as all of you know, that area can be affected pretty heavily by hurricanes. They're using mFiles to manage and process accounts receivable and billing documentation, and they had to make sure that the solution we put in place for them would be able to handle any disaster recovery needs they might have. So we implemented mFiles in a hybrid cloud environment. And the beauty of that, the flexibility of the hybrid cloud, allowed Third Coast to ensure that all of their information in mFiles is secured, protected, and available in case the company's on-premise systems are compromised by a hurricane or some other catastrophic event. In addition to that flexibility and security that the hybrid cloud deployment provides, Third Coast has also saved a significant amount of money by eliminating most of their paper-related billing processes. And just one example of this is they've saved on tanker drivers' waiting fees because the drivers no longer have to wait for documentation when they're delivering and picking up shipments. So, it just kind of shows you the tie-in there. And I do believe this wraps it up. I hope you have enjoyed today's webinar, and I hope this has given you some good ideas about how to use some of these best practices to improve the way you're able to manage and secure information. And I do look forward to the questions in the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and hand this back over to Tom.
Thanks very much, Chris. Great presentation on mFiles, and it's interesting to know more about that company and how it works. It is the time to go to our Q&A session. Just get up to that slide. There's a Get in Touch file slide for mFiles. And now it's time for your questions. Folks, I just want to remind you that if you have a question, please ask that in the Q&A slide tab down to the right of your screen. Press the send button, and we'll try to get that into the lineup during the next few minutes. We have about 15 minutes plus for questions, so we should get through quite a few of these. Our first one goes out to Rich. Rich, are there any hidden stumbling blocks when integrating an on-premise solution like an ERP, SAP, for instance, with a cloud-based content management system?
I don't know if they're invisible, but these are the most common ones that we find. First is, I'd say make sure you have a plan for the division of labor for documents and data for what goes where, and so you establish well ahead of time which is going to be your system of record or your repository, your resting point for record, and the other ones are transient information or convenience copies or whatever. Get that very clear first. Secondly, clarify very specifically down to the SKU level, SKU, exactly is going to be on-prem or off-premise. We find when we help folks with RFPs and with that whole decision process, they have to go several rounds trying to nail down exactly which components are on versus off. And also, I guess this would be point number 3, about the degree of integration required and so on. And so since a lot of this is relatively new, so it's not, 1998 type integration, it's new. Some of the integrations and connectors and so on have not been productized yet, so they're either homegrown or they're based on previous professional services that the vendors have done. So be very clear about that. Fourth, I'd say in deployment, many folks make mistakes, and I'd say trying to go too fast, too many things. I'd say, as I said before, take one step at a time. So a typical way to succeed is first you provide consumer functionality to the folks, and then contributor capability, but take it slowly when you implement and let people digest the new system and so on, rather than going too fast. And then finally, I'd say that most folks don't look at reference sites. Since, again, some of this is new, right, because it's cloud versus hybrid type approach. Don't be a pioneer unless you're willing to get chased by bears. So look for reference sites where folks maybe have done before. If they haven't, then get very clear about what your steps are going to be, and your risks. Maybe get a discount from the vendors because you are helping with the research and development efforts.
Good answer there. I think we're going to go to Chris with the next question. This comes from audience member Jim Sabogal. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How exactly do you search between ERP, transaction data, and unstructured data like videos and other things?
Sure. Yeah, it's something that's very simple to do. Basically, mFiles is able to integrate with other database systems. So your ERP has transactional data, which can then be pulled in as metadata into mFiles. So when you're searching, all of that information is available at a glance, whether or not it's structured or unstructured data. So all of your content comes up, and then within the metadata, you can actually find and access the structured data as well, like in your ERP transactional data.
Great. Rich, do you have anything to add quickly to that?
No, I think it was a great answer.
Good. Well, then let's move on to another one. This is also from Jim Sabogal. This is to both of you, and I think we'll start with Rich on this one, but then go to Chris. Can this be applied to healthcare data where HIPAA compliance is key to protecting patient information? And I think we know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear a little bit more detail if you could.
Sure. So I've been working on some HIPAA-related projects recently, so that's exactly what I had in mind when I was writing those slides. And we're talking about the direct compliance, then indirect or enabling conditions, necessary conditions, and then the third one, more pragmatic, where you're killing two birds with one stone, addressing both HIPAA compliance and also facilitating some of your organization's offensive initiatives, whether it's business intelligence or doing better, providing better ECM to everyone, EIM, and so on. So it's absolutely. So CIA for confidentiality and integrity and access, the appropriate I call it ECM, that's a little exception. EIM vendors can absolutely do that, and they can facilitate on all those pieces, both the C, the I, and the A. Can do better often than the in-house. Certainly better access as well as confidentiality and integrity. But it's who you go with is important, and how you do it according to a program framework is equally important. I'll pass it over to Chris.
Sure, and just to jump in, I mean, obviously everything that Rich kind of touched on there is all accurate and relevant. The only kind of piece I would add to it on the mFiles side of thing is obviously with workflows and automatic permissions, that's exactly how the EIM systems can help you maintain that sort of HIPAA compliance and ensuring that you're protecting all of that data is by dynamically managing all of the content so that you're having to spend less time managing it yourself, and it's an automated process.
I love it when our questions come in and give a multiple choice answer, and it's
easier. And so if you need to, stop the bleeding from your eyes, or you're particularly worried about transmission data and so on, then you go after that. Encryption at rest that's where the payload is. So that's where bad guys can really go after stuff. So that poses, the at rest poses greater risk typically. It's a bigger target, and so you want to be able to do that. But you have to do it right. That is, so encryption sometimes can cause challenges for two issues. One is that with transmission, if you do it in any way but an automated way, you can get non-compliance. That is, if you leave it up to me to encrypt data or emails or whatever, I may not do it. And so you have uneven compliance, which poses problems both for risk and regulatory agencies. But secondly, if on the other hand, when it's at rest, it sometimes poses issues for discovery, in that sometimes the discovery engines can't de-encrypt the stuff that's at rest and so on. So you just have to make sure that that's not going to be an issue for you. So short-term in transit is easier, and so may stop the bleeding from your eyes. Longer-term at rest, in addition to in transmission, makes it safer.
Great answer. I love that answer. Let's go to Chris with the next question. What's the difference between M-Files on-premise and cloud-based offerings?
Sure. So there's really no visual difference at all between the different offerings that we've got. So M-Files on-premises, cloud, and cloud hybrid look and function in exactly the same manner. The only difference would be the choice of whether you'd like to use your existing hardware, which is particularly important in regulated industries that require an on-premises solution behind a firewall, whether you need easy scalability without making a huge investment in new hardware, which is great about the cloud deployment, or if you want the flexibility of both with a cloud hybrid deployment.
That's really interesting. And for multinational corporations, I would imagine that's an advantage there, that they can do some of each.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. Next question to Rich. Can a secure single sign-on environment be created using the users and groups set up in Active Directory? That's a great question.
It is. And so I'm going to make a very succinct answer, kind of a little bit different thing for me. And then I'm going to pass it over to Chris to talk about M-Files, because being specific is, he can talk about the specific ways they do it. So the answer is yes. Chris?
Yeah, well, and actually, I'm not necessarily the most technical guy when it comes to M-Files, so the specifics about how the single sign-on environment is created and works technically, I probably would have to get back to you on.
Okay, great. Well, and that's a good moment for me to pause there and say that if anybody has a question that we don't answer today, or that you'd like to follow up on or want more information, you can contact our guests at their addresses that you show on the slide here, or the other information we've had in this presentation. Be glad to put you in touch. We'll be forwarding all our questions to the presenters today so that they can follow up with you offline.
Absolutely.
Okay, another question for Rich. What are the scenarios or use cases where a hybrid cloud deployment would be the best option for ensuring security and supporting compliance? And I know Chris just touched on that a little bit, but here's another chance for you to say a little more on that, Rich.
No, same sort of issues where you have high security or regulatory compliance issues, where some data in your repositories or some users have to be treated differently than others. Then absolutely, it's the way to go. If you want to partition parts of your applications from others and so on. It's often hybrid.
Have something on mind, please use that Q&A window to get in touch with us. If there's some problem with that, you can use the chat and send your message to the CMS Wire host, and we'll get your question in the lineup. Let's go to Chris for another one. This listener says, I have an on-premises ERP. Can I integrate it with M-Files in the cloud? I think we covered that a little bit, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail here on what that entails. Chris, are you with us? Chris?
You might be on mute.
Yeah, he might be. I don't see him on mute, but Rich, why don't you fill in here for a moment for Chris? What do you think?
Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh, there he is. Sorry,
Yeah,
we lost you there. Chris, did you hear the question? I can repeat it if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, absolutely, you can integrate with an ERP system that's on-premise if you're in the cloud. So mFiles integrates with your other business systems, no matter which deployment you're using. mFiles in the cloud can integrate with an existing on-premises ERP, or it can work the other way around. So if, with a cloud ERP system integrating with an on-premises mFiles deployment. So it's very simple to sort of create that integration either way.
Very good. Let's go to Rich with a question about the public versus private cloud. Which is the best option for companies with demanding security and compliance requirements? And I know you went over this in the first few slides too, but I'd be interested to hear on the public versus private aspect if you can go into a little bit more detail.
Private is typically best, but for many folks, if you look at
I'm not really too much. I mean, obviously, we're kind of able to handle either sort of implementation of public versus private, but I think Rich is spot on.
Okay, sounds good. And let's go to Rich again for another question. When evaluating cloud-based information management vendors or solutions, what type of functionality or capabilities should I look for to ensure the highest level of information security?
Right. So I'm just going to broaden it a little bit. Obviously, you're looking at the software, and then you're looking at the service provider, right? So with both of those, first thing you look for is, which may trump all functionality, is vendor, product, and project risk, and that's what we call it. So you make sure that both players are, sustainable, that they're in great health, and so on. Product risk is make sure that their strategy is aligned with you, that they're not just dabbling in providing a cloud-based solution, either a software that can be cloud-based or providing ECM-based systems, EIM-based systems through the cloud. And then third, project risk, and that is make sure that you have available and competent support for what you need to do. We move over to the functionality, and the kind of functionality you're looking, make sure that it's high grade, make sure it meets your security and compliance requirements, which often means granularity of being able to manage documents from a retention and disposition standpoint, and so on. So what it means is you can be very granular with relatively little effort and say, these kinds of documents I want to put this kind of access and security labels to. These I want to retain for this period. These I want to hold for audit. These I want to blow away so they don't damage me in litigation, and so on. So
okay, great.
That kind of granularity.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear it that way.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me jumping in really quickly here to kind of talk about it from an mFiles perspective. I mean,
I was just going to ask you to do that.
Yeah, Rich is exactly right. When you're kind of going through this laundry list of all the vendors and solutions that are out there, mFiles is backed by Microsoft Azure platform, so we really have gone headfirst into the cloud in a real way, in a meaningful way, and offering all of the options so that you've got a seamless experience across all of the different types of deployment, whether you are using an on-premises or a cloud-based mFiles system. And then the support angle of it. The fact that mFiles is global is helpful in that regard too. We've got people that can help out in multiple countries, multiple regions at all times. And then information security is obviously a huge deal as well. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks to this can be user adoption. And so by developing a tool that is instantly familiar to users, it just allows for all those things to kind of come together nicely when it relates to mFiles.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Chris, because none of this technology works unless people are going to use it. So that's a very important consideration. I think a lot of times folks focus on the technology and forget about the cultural issues involved. Yeah. Very important point. Thank you for bringing that up before we sign off today. Okay, I think we've hit the end of our program. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. This webinar has been recorded. A video and recap article will be emailed to you and available on CMS Wire within a few days. My thanks again to Rich Medina and to Chris Davidson for their great presentations today. Rich, I just think you covered the whole ballpark there and very well, too. Thank you for that. If your company is interested in sponsoring a webinar, please email us at advertising@cmswire.com, and we'll tell you what your options are there. That'd be really great. Before we sign off today, I want to thank Candace Cui, our floor director, John Lewis, our producer, Anton Asen, our audio director, and Casey Sheld, who's handling social media for today's presentation. For CMS Wire, M-Files, Doculabs, and the Simpler Media Group, this is Tom Murphy signing off. Thank you.